WholeCEO with Lisa G. I'm the best-selling author of The Boss Weight Loss. I'm bringing you the top tips to be unstoppable. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to actually pull up a chair with today's top experts in weight loss, mindset, and business. Learn our top tips to set you up for success so that you can have more energy, be fit and resilient, and feel unstoppable. Hey everyone, so excited. We have Drew Ackerman here with us today. Hey Drew.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being here. I just love the name of your podcast. So I'll tell you guys a little bit about Drew, and then we'll get into how we can talk about how sleep will help you go from being stuck to unstoppable. So Drew Ackerman is the creator and host of Sleep With Me, the one-of-a-kind bedtime story podcast featured in the New York Times, New Yorker, Buzzfeed, Mental Floss, Dr. Oz. Born out of Drew's childhood insomnia, Sleep With Me was inspired by late-night comedy radio, which was the one only thing that helped him fall asleep. Created in 2013, Sleep With Me combines the pain of insomnia with the relief of laughing and turns it into a unique storytelling podcast. And Drew's stories on the show are inspired by his childhood as the oldest of 6 children. And I just love your podcast. So I want to jump into being unstoppable. And I know myself, I've struggled with like being unstoppable and being stuck as an entrepreneur and all the ups and downs. And insomnia is so real with all of the times that I can admit that I've gone to bed with my computer and my iPhone. I know I've done everything wrong. But why don't you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, so I've always been curious about sleep, and it did start when I stopped being able to sleep around 5th and 6th grade. I was just having a lot of anxiety and stress at school, and I just was so stressed I would be up all night worrying instead of being able to fall asleep, and then I'd be worried about not being able to fall asleep. And eventually I started listening to comedy radio, but it was a really tough time for me. And I know for a lot of people that can't sleep, even as a kid, you tell people and they're like, oh, well, why don't you just think of something nice and you'll fall right asleep? Or, oh, why don't you try to relax? And you're like, yeah, I've tried to relax. I've tried to think of stuff that's nice, and I still can't sleep. And eventually, as an adult, I just started thinking about this idea, like, well, kids get bedtime stories, but how come adults don't get bedtime stories? I mean, maybe you get one in person or you have a partner read to you or something, but on a regular basis, there wasn't any solutions that were a little bit silly. There's a lot of serious sleep solutions, but like you're saying, like with bedtime, there's so many shoulds that it can create even more pressure, which creates more sleeplessness. So I kind of wanted to interject some fun into it. And so I started the show in 2013 and kind of just, I didn't even know how to podcast at the time. I was kind of learning as I was making it and figuring it out.
Well, I'm so happy for you for all of your success. And I know for me, the brain is something you can just never really turn off, and like counting sheep isn't going to help, and trying to listen, sometimes I try to listen to a meditation or something, but I know it's a struggle. The struggle is real, and I find for people that I try to help with weight loss and their health in general, not getting enough sleep is a real deal breaker for being healthy, isn't it?
It is for sure. And it's one of those things that's like, it impacts your physical and your mental health. And it can be really tough to break the cycle once you get into it, because then you're like, oh, is this my fault? Oh, people are like, well, you're doing it wrong. You got to sleep harder. And you're like, well, I don't know if that's possible. And so, and then it impacts your ability to have other healthy habits. If you're not rested, you're more irritable. It can impact your personal relationships, and then it just impacts your motivation. It's like, well, why should I try to eat healthy, or why should I, exercise? I'm already exhausted. And so, yeah, it's my pleasure for the people that I can help fall asleep. I really take a lot of pride in being able to help anyone I can.
I love that, because for me, I feel like you're you're like kind of like this raw nerve walking around and
Yeah.
likelier to get triggered and angry and not just have patience for things when you're tired, right?
Right, right. And it's a very disempowering. And I think like with anything like exercise or any consistent habits, it really is hard to associate the things you can do to impact your sleep can be slow and methodical, and you do have to do them on a regular basis, like having a bedtime routine or having a good morning routine. They don't have an instant payoff, and then it's easy to forget. It's like, oh, I mean, I forget my bedtime routine all the time. I've been doing this podcast for 6 years, and I know that's what's going to help me not sleep well every night, but the majority of nights, if I have a good bedtime habits, it normally impacts me having good sleep. But then I'll be like, I'll go on vacation, I'll come back, I'll be like, nah, I don't need to stretch, I don't need to meditate, I don't need to, I'm just going to try to go to bed, and then it doesn't work, and I'm like, oh, wait a second, I got to go back to trying to build that habit 1 minute at a time or whatever.
Well, can you talk a little bit about sleep hygiene? And obviously, we know if people want, if weight loss and being healthier, living longer is a goal and being unstoppable, like what is your recommendation on sleep hygiene?
For me, I think it's like one making a choice. Like, I think that, like, it's like, oh, you should be doing this or like whatever. It's like, oh, do you want to do this? And can you do it on a regular basis? And then what are the one or two things you can do on a nightly basis to help you sleep? And I think bedtime hygiene is like, is your room dark? Is it cool? Do you have a comfortable place to sleep? And then it's, stopping using your device. My best piece of advice is like, what time do you want to be to sleep? Start winding down an hour before that and try to, put your phone away and maybe read a book or have a cup of tea. Whatever works best for you is kind of like a keystone habit. Like, oh, every night I like to read. And I know that I can go to that every single night. And it's kind of my trigger for saying, okay, let's start to relax and wind down. And then maybe over time build into that. Like, oh, maybe I also want to journal, or maybe I want to meditate, or for me, with exercise, I find foam rolling, like rolling out at nighttime, helps. But I also loathe foam rolling because it's not always the most pleasant experience. And then when you don't do it, it's even worse. But it's like, oh, that's something I add on. It's like, okay, especially in the new year, it's like, oh, let's try to foam roll for 5 minutes and get back into that habit. And making it fun and taking out that critical part of you that's like, oh, this has got to be so serious. It's like, what fun things can you have at bedtime that you really like? So then you're looking forward to it instead of dreading it.
So it's more like self-care. I mean, I love the suggestion about the foam roller because I find stress and anxiety is so prevalent in our society right now. And as an entrepreneur, I feel like we're always trying to wear 100 hats and have like octopus arms trying to do everything. And for me, like I love the idea of the foam roller and I love the idea of baby steps and not beating yourself up for not doing it right. Just taking like maybe just getting 10% better every day. And foam roller is so good because all the stress and anxiety of the day is held in our muscles and it can really relax you, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think it helps create that dialogue with yourself, like you're saying, of self-care. It's like, not only does it feel physically good, but it's also a reminder to me to against whatever that part of me that's so critical is like, hey, I did some foam rolling. That's pretty nice. Huh? That's a start. And so my body's starting to relax, and I'm saying, oh, we did accomplish some things today. Like you're saying, with all of these things we feel like we have to get done. It's like, well, I did that and I did this, and I'm just a person, I'm just doing the best I can, so now I'm ready for bed, and try to put aside those expectations, which can really, I mean, for me, they really build up, or it's like, oh, you didn't do enough today. It's like, okay, well, I did do these things and I accomplished these things.
So taking credit for the stuff you already did, and that's such a great suggestion too. So I love to give people like bite-sized bullets. So is there any like specific amount of sleep we're supposed to be sleeping that you would suggest?
You know, I mean, I think the idea that you should be sleeping 7 to 8 hours is pretty backed by science. I mean, I know there's people that say, oh, like Margaret Thatcher only needed 1 hour of sleep tonight a night, and she was super, super efficient and everything. But I think that's like might be a genetic anomaly. Like for most people, if you're the exception to the rule, you'll find out in a pleasant way. But for most people, like having 7 to 8 hours of sleep is kind of critical, and and planning for that. And like you're saying, I don't know that there's anything that's over the long term more efficient. It's like, well, I only sleep 5 hours because I can work 3 more hours. It's like, okay, let me know about that. How's that going in 10 years? It's like it's going to slowly wear you down.
Yeah, so not being a raw nerve and so irritable and tired and cranky is going to be helped by having a nighttime routine, deciding what your nighttime routine is going to be, trying to sleep for 7 or 8 hours, not beating yourself up about what you didn't do during the day, but taking credit for the stuff you did do. And so you said your personal nighttime routine is to take the devices out an hour before and start preparing an hour before bed. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not perfect, so it's like a lot of times I get in bed and I'm like, well, let me just check and see if any emails came in or whatever. So sometimes I do get tempted, but for the most part, it's like having that as a goal to be like, okay, let's try not to do that, or just reminding yourself like with your goals, it's like, oh, is this contributing to my goal of getting a good sleep or not? And you say, well, not tonight. I'm not. I'm going to be bad, bad and scroll through Instagram before I try to go to sleep. Yeah, that nobody's perfect. Another bite-sized thing that you can do that will impact your sleep is in the mornings. Is trying to get some sunlight. And I know not everyone lives somewhere where you have access to the sun, but if you have a pet, if you could take your dog for a walk or just open your windows, like studies have shown that morning access to sunlight really helps with your biorhythms. And then there's inexpensive like sun simulators or light therapy units you can get and during the winter to just expose yourself to that sunlight in the morning, and it just is shown to help sleep cycles at night as well.
Well, that's another super helpful thing. Just get into the natural, like circadian rhythm of when we're meant to go to sleep. Because some people are like, "Oh, I'm a night owl. I'm going to go to bed at 2 in the morning. I'm going to wake up at 10." No, that's not when we're meant to go to sleep. We're meant to go to sleep more when it's dark out and wake up more when it's light out, right? Don't you agree? Um, and the other thing I wanted to talk about is the negative inner critic. I know we all have that like negative inner critic. And do you want to address that at all?
Yeah, I mean, my inner critic really got in the way of the podcast and probably a lot of other things in my life, like other healthy habits. Like for me, I had the idea for the podcast way before I started it, and that part of me was like, "Oh no, 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 you can't do that. Like that's a terrible idea. What do you're not you can't make a podcast. Like you don't know what no one would care. That would be embarrassing." And I said, "Oh, okay, you're right, you're right." And then the idea kept coming back up, and then at some point, I just had enough calm in me to be like, well, why don't we just try to see how it goes and try to make this. And I still have to, when I sit down to record my show, a lot of times quiet my inner critic and be like, okay, well, we're just going to try to do the best we can right now. And if I had given in and kept giving into that critic or given to it, even when it comes up, I wouldn't be of service to other people. I wouldn't be helping people fall asleep. And for me, it kind of is like this similar to self-care of being like, oh, okay, like just like you're talking to someone like a grouchy person on the bus or at the grocery store, you're like, oh, well, actually the beans are one more aisle over. I know, like trying to be helpful to the critic and kind of acknowledge, be like, oh yeah, this probably, isn't going to be perfect. And yeah, it's kind of tough work. But at the same time, so you can move forward and so you can consistently do it. And for me, it's like, okay, well, let's just try to make one more episode then. And I've been able to roll that to 6 years of making the podcast, over 800 episodes, just by saying, okay, well, maybe we could think about your ideas of quitting and giving up. But for now, today, we're going to try to get this done. And then, yeah, if we think we should quit or give up tomorrow, that's an option.
I love how you talk to yourself like that because the researchers even have a name for it. It's like called ANT for the automatic negative thinking, and it's something we all struggle with. And you've left us with so many great pearls of wisdom. Do you have anything else you want to leave our audience with about how sleeping better, having a better sleep hygiene can impact them on being unstoppable?
I think like saying to yourself and trying to believe it or create this space that you do deserve a good night's sleep. I think that's a powerful thing, is just a reminder, whether you're getting it or not, like taking the pressure or the criticism or the shame out of it and be like, you know what, you really do deserve a good night's sleep, or you do deserve a situation where you're rested and not a raw nerve during the day, so that you can flourish, so that you can have, fruitful relationships and exercise and focus on what you're trying to build. So just try to remind yourself of that you do deserve a good night's sleep.
Thank you so much for bringing it back to self-care, and thank you for all of your awesome advice, Drew. And I appreciate you coming on here.
Thank you so much for having me on.
This episode is brought to you by Good Pod. Protein shakes are messy, expensive, and hard to make. Good Pod is a new amazing shake maker that's a blender and a pod in one. Take a pod, fill your glass with water or milk in 60 seconds or less. You have a healthy protein shake and it's ready to drink. Just like that.